Have you ever noticed that when you start seeing the world through a different lens, people begin to drift away? The moment you stop mirroring what everyone else is doing, you find yourself standing alone more often than not. And in those moments, an unsettling doubt creeps in. Maybe it's not them. Maybe you are the one who's wrong. Maybe questioning everything makes you the villain in your own story. From the earliest moments of childhood, we're handed an invisible guidebook. Play by the rules, stay inside the lines, and life will reward you. But should you question the rules or even the lines themselves, the world responds with cold indifference or outright resistance. No one comes out and says it in plain words, but the message is delivered in side glances, in uncomfortable pauses, in the sting of subtle corrections dressed up as guidance. Without realizing it, obedience seeps into your very being like an unnoticed virus. Before you've ever had the chance to grasp what real freedom feels like, your mind is being taught to keep itself in check. Every time you venture to think differently now, a strange guilt curls up inside you, whispering that familiar line. Who do you think you are to question this? But here's a thought worth considering. What if it's not you that's flawed? What if this urge to doubt and conform was deliberately woven into you over years of subtle conditioning? This isn't a message packed with convenient answers. It's a mirror held up to reflect the uncomfortable questions that society prefers to leave unspoken. Think back to your school days. Remember the child who asked endless questions, eyes wide with curiosity? Over time, that child often became the adult who swallows information without resistance. That transformation wasn't some random accident. Classrooms, which should have sparked wonder and discovery, were instead turned into conveyor belts, mass-producing minds that fit an existing mold. Think of the student who always asked why during lessons. Over time, they were branded as a nuisance, someone who slowed the machine down. Meanwhile, the quiet child who copied everything without reflection was praised as a model student. The lesson couldn't have been clearer. Independent thought brings trouble. Compliance wins you approval. Just imagine for a moment if your education had encouraged you to question every assumption, to build your own viewpoint, to challenge even the teacher when things didn't make sense. How different would you be today? Instead, you were trained to seek out one correct answer, one already chosen by someone positioned above you. Education didn't sculpt you into a thinker. It molded you into a processor, a machine for digesting and regurgitating facts. Your curiosity was clipped, little by little, like a branch on a tree that dared to grow in an inconvenient direction. Every unanswered question, every because I said so, each moment where you were told to accept without understanding, each one reshaped your mind to embrace passivity. And here's the tragedy. The system works. You reach adulthood afraid to get things wrong, terrified to step out of line, hesitant to voice the wrong question at the wrong moment. Fear of failure isn't confined to the classroom. It follows you into life, morphing into a fear of rejection, of exclusion, of being marked as difficult or strange. So you learn to suppress your doubts and stick to the safe, well-worn path. You probably don't even notice anymore. That inquisitive voice inside you has been muffled for so long, you've forgotten it ever existed. But then comes that gnawing emptiness, the one you feel even when you're ticking all the right boxes, even when life looks perfect from the outside. Why does following the rules feel so hollow? Because in addition to math and history, you absorbed another curriculum, one that was never written in any book. A hidden syllabus that carried more weight than any official lesson plan. You were taught to raise your hand before speaking, to ask permission for your most basic needs, to wait in line without question, and most dangerously, to accept the idea that some people were born to lead while others were meant to obey. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a masterpiece of social design. You were trained to believe that hierarchy was natural, that questioning authority was disrespectful, that forming your own opinion was an act of arrogance, and that standing out was a danger best avoided. How often did you hear things like, "Because I said so," "Because that's just how it is," "Because it's always been done this way"? These phrases taught you nothing about the world itself, but they carved a deep groove in your mind. It is not your place to understand, only to accept. Formal education was never neutral. Its aim wasn't to create independent thinkers, but to manufacture predictable, obedient citizens. People who wouldn't ask too many questions. People who would accept the world as presented to them without protest. Productive workers, not courageous innovators. The system succeeded brilliantly. Most people will live their entire lives without even realizing that they've been programmed. You were meticulously trained to seek approval, to crave validation, to follow rules without questioning their purpose or origin. And that's why, when you do attempt to think independently, it feels like you're committing some sort of transgression, because that is precisely what you were conditioned to believe. The result? An adult who fears their own mind, someone who feels guilty for questioning, who doubts themselves for thinking differently, who feels isolated for not marching in step with the crowd. An adult who spends years asking why life feels strangely disconnected, even when they seem to be doing everything right. Once school let go of your hand, the media picked up where it left off, seamlessly continuing the training. You open your phone, flip on the TV, scroll through social media, all under the illusion of becoming more informed. But in reality, the programming has only grown more sophisticated. Media no longer forces you to adopt a particular viewpoint. Instead, it offers the illusion of choice while steering you toward consensus without you even noticing. It's genius, really. You watch a show and subtly absorb certain values. You glance at the news and walk away with a freshly minted opinion. You scroll your feed and gradually calibrate your sense of what's normal and what's unacceptable. Pay close attention, and you'll notice it. Certain topics seem to erupt everywhere simultaneously. Everyone parroting the same phrases, voicing identical opinions on issues far too complex for such uniformity. This isn't some fluke, it's the deliberate crafting of mass consensus. The media doesn't need to forbid divergent thought outright. It simply makes such thinking invisible, absurd, or dangerous. Ideas not sanctioned by the dominant narrative vanish from public discourse, and those that do appear are cloaked in ridicule or associated with extremism, ensuring you reject them reflexively without ever engaging with their content. You grow up believing you understand the world, but in truth, you only know the carefully curated version handed to you. When a thought arises that conflicts with this official version, you feel actual discomfort, as though you're entertaining forbidden knowledge. And in a sense, you are. The media hasn't just shaped your thoughts, it has sculpted your emotional responses to those thoughts. It installed a mental alarm that triggers whenever you stray too far from the approved narrative. Since childhood, you were taught a harsh lesson. Being different invites pain. Think of the peer who dressed differently, who pursued odd interests, who didn't fit the group mold. They were marginalized, mocked, ostracized. The message was loud and clear: survival depends on conformity. And so you learned to blend in. This fear of rejection is perhaps the most potent form of control there is, more effective than any armed force or surveillance state, because it burrows into your deepest need for belonging. You don't need patrols in the streets when the terror of social isolation polices your mind 24 hours a day. During adolescence, this conditioning intensifies. You contort yourself to fit the crowd. You force yourself to enjoy the popular music. You dress to match the current trends. even when they don't suit you. You laugh along with jokes that strike no chord in you. You agree with ideas that clash with your own instincts, all to dodge the spectre of being left alone. And it works. You're embraced by the group. You achieve that precious acceptance, but you pay a steep price. You bury vast portions of your authentic self, hiding them beneath layers of social camouflage until you forget they were ever there. The trouble is, this fear of rejection doesn't fade after adolescence. It trails you into adulthood like an unwelcome shadow. In the workplace, you silence your true opinions to avoid being branded as difficult. In relationships, you hide facets of yourself to avoid risking rejection. Within your family, you play the role they expect, losing sight of where the performance ends and where your real self begins. Ultimately, you become an adult, terrified of your own authenticity, someone who would rather live a life that isn't their own than face the unknown in search of one that is. You were conditioned to revere authority figures as inherently wiser than you. Parents, teachers, bosses, experts, leaders, all were placed on pedestals in the mental framework installed in your mind, and you learned your place, lower down in the realm of the obedient. But here's the twist. Respecting authority often becomes a code for abandoning independent thought. You learn not to question the doctor when the treatment clearly isn't working, not to disagree with your boss even when their decision defies logic, not to challenge the expert even when their pronouncements contradict your own lived experience. Modern society's veneration of authority breeds a toxic hierarchy of knowledge. Your perceptions, your finely tuned intuition, your hard-earned wisdom, all are dismissed in favor of the opinions of those with the proper credentials, titles, or fame. You've been here, haven't you? Sensed something was wrong but bit your tongue because who am I to challenge an expert? Witnessed an obvious injustice but stayed silent because the authority figure said otherwise. Felt a decision was deeply wrong but acquiesced because it came from above. This automatic obedience severs your connection to your own intelligence. You lose trust in your senses, your feelings, your accumulated wisdom. And when you do attempt to exercise independent judgment, guilt floods in as if you've committed an act of rebellion. The outcome is an adult fully capable of critical thought, yet trained not to use it where it matters most. Someone who opts for the safety of guided ignorance over the risk of genuine understanding. And the most chilling part? You no longer need external control. You've internalized it so completely that you police yourself with terrifying efficiency. There's now a constant censor operating within your mind. An idea arises and you immediately suppress it. Better not say that. You consider expressing an opinion and retreat. What if someone takes offense? You start to question something and stop short. Don't want to sound extreme. Self-censorship surpasses external censorship because it never rests. You've been so well trained that you no longer test boundaries. You've developed internal filters that preemptively kill ideas before they even take form. It's as if a tyrant judge lives in your head, ruling over every thought. This won't be received well. This will cause trouble. This isn't normal. And you obey this inner voice religiously, unaware that it was planted by forces beyond you. The tragedy of it all is that this inner censor robs you of the opportunity to meet the truest version of yourself. The ideas you might have explored, the genuine opinions you might have voiced, the deep reflections you could have embraced. They remain locked away in a mental prison of your own making. And so you drift through life with an uneasy emptiness, a nagging sense that you are living someone else's story, watching a version of life play out through a foggy window rather than experiencing it firsthand. You have become a willing captive of your own conditioned mind, and what's worse, you don't even see the keys already clutched in your hand. The forces that shape this captivity go beyond simple obedience. There exists a subtle moral current, an invisible leash that tugs at you whenever you stray too far from the herd. This morality isn't rooted in wisdom or deep introspection. It's anchored to the flimsy logic of social convention. It whispers to you, fit in, conform, don't make waves, and you oblige, often without a second thought. Everyone else is doing it. This is just how things are. It has always been this way. These phrases serve as the death knell of independent thought, shutting down curiosity before it has a chance to take its first breath. Consider for a moment how many of your major life decisions were guided not by personal conviction, but by what was expected of you. The career path you chose, the relationships you pursued, the values you adopted. How many were reflections of your own authentic beliefs, and how many were borrowed from the collective consensus? It's an uncomfortable reckoning, one that many people never dare to confront. There is comfort in conformity. When you follow the crowd, you are shielded from blame. If things go wrong, it's not your fault. It was simply what everyone else was doing. If things go right, you share in the collective credit. In this way, you avoid the terrifying burden of personal responsibility. But this safety comes at a profound cost. You forfeit your individuality, your agency, your moral compass. You become a shadow in the crowd, living a life scripted by others. When you finally attempt to break free of this cycle, the discomfort can be overwhelming. The moment you begin to think for yourself, it feels as though you are betraying not only the expectations of others, but the identity you've constructed to survive in a conformist world. You experience a deep internal conflict, a war between your conditioned self and the authentic voice that has long been silenced. The result is a life spent on autopilot. You move through the motions of existence, following a script you never consciously chose, playing a role that was assigned to you long ago. And this is the great irony. True thinking is terrifying because it forces you to choose. And with choice comes responsibility, not just for your actions, but for the consequences that follow. Genuine freedom is not the utopian dream it is often portrayed to be. It is heavy, it is demanding, and it is often lonely. When you follow predefined rules, life is simpler. The path is already laid out for you. If you fail, you can blame the system. If you succeed, the credit is shared. But when you seize control of your own life, every outcome, good or bad, rests squarely on your shoulders, and that can be paralyzing. It's far easier to lament a job you despise than to muster the courage to leave it behind and create something that resonates with your soul. It is simpler to remain in a relationship that stifles you than to face the solitude that might accompany the search for true connection. It is less daunting to accept a life that feels foreign than to brave the uncertainty of building one that is authentically yours. True freedom demands a level of courage that most people are never taught to cultivate. It requires the willingness to fail publicly, to weather the judgment of others, to endure periods of isolation. It calls for an unwavering acceptance that you alone are responsible for the quality of your life, for your choices, for your consequences. And when you begin this journey of independent thought, it is natural to feel lost, anxious, unsure, not because you are making a mistake, but because you are walking a path that demands a bravery few are ever encouraged to develop. Courage is inseparable from fear. It is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Many will choose the comforting chains of obedience over the daunting risks of freedom. And there is no shame in that choice, provided it is made consciously and not from a place of unconscious programming. The road to liberation does not lie in acquiring more information, attending more seminars, or consuming more content. It lies in the arduous process of unlearning. You must strip away the layers of conditioned obedience. You must disentangle your worth from the validation of others. You must reclaim your voice from the grip of self-censorship. This process is as painful as it is necessary. It is like pulling out an infected tooth, an act that causes acute discomfort, but is ultimately healing. You must confront and discard beliefs that were implanted in your mind without your informed consent. You must expose fears that masquerade as instincts but were meticulously cultivated. You must dismantle limitations that appear as unchangeable truths but are in reality carefully constructed illusions. The most challenging task is to question everything, especially the beliefs that are held as self-evident truths by the majority. The free thinker accepts nothing at face value, regardless of its popularity, official status, or tradition. This path is lonely at first. You will distance yourself from those who still operate entirely on social autopilot. Your conversations will become deeper, more unsettling. Your inquiries will grow sharper, more disruptive, and not everyone will welcome this shift. But something remarkable happens along the way. You begin to encounter others who are also on this path of self-discovery. Individuals who question, who think independently, who dare to be different. In their company, you find a kindred spirit. You realize that you are not alone. There exists an unseen community of free minds scattered across the world. More importantly, you begin to trust your own judgment. You learn to rely on your perceptions, your intuitions, your capacity to navigate life guided by your inner compass rather than external maps drawn by others. You grasp an uncomfortable but liberating truth. No one will applaud you for thinking differently. No one will throw a parade in your honor for challenging the system. You will not be showered with praise for having the audacity to be authentically yourself. In fact, you may encounter awkward silences, subtle criticism, even overt rejection. But in exchange, you will gain something far more valuable, a profound sense of integrity. To think independently is to engage in a silent rebellion against a world designed to keep you compliant. It is an act of defiance against a system that thrives on your mental passivity. When you stop blindly consuming the narratives fed to you, when you question the ideas you are told to accept, when you begin to think with your own mind, you become dangerous. Dangerous to those who profit from your ignorance. Dangerous to those who depend on your obedience. Dangerous to those whose power is built on the mental submission of the masses. That is why the system will never encourage you to think for yourself. No authority figure will grant you permission to challenge the status quo. No beneficiary of the current order will commend you for being inconveniently different. You must grant yourself that permission. You must become your own mentor. You must summon the courage to embark on this path without external validation. And when you make that choice, everything changes. You cease to be a puppet manipulated by invisible strings. You become a person of genuine agency. You stop parroting the ideas of others and cultivate an authentic voice. You evolve from a faceless member of the crowd into a unique individual. This is precisely what the system fears most and works tirelessly to prevent. You were not educated to be conscious. You were trained to be functional. You were not nurtured to be creative. You were conditioned to be predictable. You were not encouraged to question. You were taught to repeat. You were not prepared to lead courageously. You were groomed to serve efficiently. And this programming worked flawlessly for a time. You fit the molds, you gained social acceptance, you avoided creating inconvenient problems. But now you see it. You recognize the programming. You acknowledge the artificial limits. You understand the subtle control. The question that matters now is no longer why was this done to me? The question that will shape the rest of your life is far more urgent. What will I do with this awareness? Will you continue to obey out of habit? Or will you choose at long last to live by conscious intention? If these words have stirred something within you, if they have unsettled you, if they have reminded you of the person you once were, then you are ready for the next step, ready to reclaim your mind from the grip of unconscious programming, ready to embrace the difficult, messy, exhilarating process of thinking for yourself. Know this: no diploma will be awarded to mark your progress. No official recognition will celebrate your courage. You will walk this path quietly, sometimes in solitude, but in doing so, you will taste a kind of freedom that few ever experience. A freedom that comes not from the absence of external constraints, but from the reclamation of your own mind. And that is a freedom worth any price.